This broadcast was sponsored by ArmorCam, working for your future and you. Good morning, Fairport. I'm Brandots back from the Half-Rats Dimension, here to give you a daily rundown of the news. Harlan Wade has won Man of the Year Award, Father of the Year Award, and Ethical Scientist of the Year Award all in one night. His acceptance ceremony was full of drunken rambling and crying. On to the weather. It's looking clear because this is a perfect city and nothing will ever go wrong here. Not even a nuclear war could touch this. Little update on the weather forecast. Looks like there's a small chance for a nuclear winter. I will see you on Fairport 1 next time when all this has cleared up. What's harder to make, a good video game or a good sequel to a video game? Well, I'd say it's situational. It depends on where you left the bar. If your first game was bad, in theory the only way you can go is up. But if you released a masterpiece, well, that hurdle's a little harder to clear.
Half-Life 2 is an amazing game. It is probably the best first-person shooter, single-player first-person shooter that I've ever played.
And today we look at a game that tried its luck at its own hurdle and didn't make the cut. A fascinating, if not slightly sad, case study of a renowned series' first steps into the realm of mediocrity. A game that feels more confused about what it wants to be than a 5-year-old at a careers expo. A game called F.E.A.R 2. Hello everybody and welcome to my F.E.A.R 2 retrospective. Now, just before we get started, a lot of story beats in F.E.A.R 2 rely on you knowing what happened in F.E.A.R 1, and I've made a video on that where I explain a lot of the lore, so if you want to know what's going on, go check out that video first. But otherwise, F.E.A.R 2.
Our target is Genevieve Armstead.
This was a game that had a lot riding on it. The original F.E.A.R was another trophy for the FPS genre in the early 2000s. It showed just how deep a story could be in a game. It showed just how advanced an AI could be. It showed just how good a game could look. The OG F.E.A.R became the gold standard in a lot of categories for a couple of years before it was eventually surpassed by newer games. And when F.E.A.R 2 was announced, people were expecting it to once again show the industry who was boss. But I can tell you right now it didn't, and this is very much thanks to the behind the scenes issues going on at Monolith Studios in 2006. Pretty much during the development of the original F.E.A.R, there was a deal made with a publisher that only the OGs watching will know, a company named Vivendi. Now this deal was absolutely great, just as long as Monolith was publishing games through Vivendi forever. Come 2004, however, big dog Warner Bros. Games kicks down Monolith's doors and purchases the dev studio. F.E.A.R 1 was released without a hitch, but in 2006, Monolith let everyone know about the elephant in the room. And this elephant was the fact that due to the deal with Vivendi and Warner Bros. Being so close in time to each other, some strange stuff was legally happening with the F.E.A.R IP. Monolith / Warner Bros. Owned the F.E.A.R IP. They owned the game, the story, the characters, but Vivendi owned the name. This became a huge issue because how can you make a sequel to your game without using the name? They couldn't even mention the in-universe organization of F.E.A.R. How on earth can you make a sequel when you're missing the central piece of the world? Well, the answer was clear. Don't name it F.E.A.R and get someone else to do it for you. That someone turned out to be the fans, and in June of 2007, Monolith announced the Name Your F.E.A.R campaign. Pretty much they said, hey guys, what would you name F.E.A.R if you absolutely could not call it F.E.A.R? They took submissions and the final 3 names came down as Dead Echo, Project Origin, and Dark Signal. In the end, Project Origin was chosen as the final, definitive, absolutely uncontested title of F.E.A.R 2. Until 1 year later when Warner Bros. Bought the F.E.A.R rights back and then they just named it F.E.A.R 2 and tacked Project Origin onto the back. So yeah, it was a little bit of a headache-inducing run around here, but it was nothing compared to the actual development. Not being satisfied with how F.E.A.R 1 was ported onto consoles, Monolith decided it would be better to create 3 different versions of F.E.A.R 2, each tailored to the player experience on each platform they were on.
Like that's ever gonna happen.
Yeah, that idea got thrown out pretty quickly, but they were working on a bunch of different versions of F.E.A.R before it all just got mixed into one, which just wastes a bunch of time. And just one more element to make it a little more complicated, while Monolith was developing F.E.A.R 2, Vivendi was developing their own version of F.E.A.R 2 as well, but I won't be talking about that because this F.E.A.R 2 morphed into F.E.A.R 3, which we'll talk about next time. So that's mostly the development of F.E.A.R 2. As far as actual problems went during the process, this game was in the eye of the storm. Everything around it was pure chaos while they just slowly kind of formed this thing. And once you get into the game, you kind of have to wonder if it was all worth it. This whole back and forth mess for a game that is just pretty alright. But yeah, I know you guys don't just want to hear me talk about what created this game, you want to hear about the actual game. So without further ado, let's get into it. F.E.A.R 2 begins with a dream. We're in a ruined city, and walking through it, we occasionally observe a young girl in a red dress walking away from us. Following her, we find a swing on a tree, dangling over a pit, and upon entering it,
Join us, sunshine.
we have just stepped into the combat boots of Michael Beckett, an SFOD TAC-D operator. I didn't really bring it up in the F.E.A.R 1 breakdown, but SFOD, or Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, were the dudes who worked with Point Man in the first game and who also got turned to skeletons. In F.E.A.R 2, Beckett is a part of a squad within this detachment called Dark Signal, and we're being tasked with taking Genevieve Aristide into protective custody. Since intel has come up that indicates the Armacam board of directors might be looking to snuff out any links the company had to the situation at Armacam HQ. After the briefing, we get dropped off in front of Genevieve's apartment with one of our squad mates named Jankowski. And if that name rings a bell, it's because this is the younger brother of Spencer Jankowski, the bald dude that just goes missing in the first game.
What the hell are you doing, man? Is that your car? No.
Heading inside, everything seems clear on our initial sweep until we link up with the rest of the squad who's found a dead civilian. Heading to a nearby elevator, our vision goes blurry, and one of our squad mates named Keegan is shot by an Armacam mercenary. After shooting him and entering the elevator, we ride it to Genevieve's penthouse, where we have to enter a big gunfight with a bunch more of Armacam's mercenaries. I'll talk about gameplay later because honestly, it is probably the least interesting thing about this game, and the one thing I do want to talk about in this penthouse is the atmosphere. As you can probably tell, the opening of F.E.A.R 2 takes place during the same period of time that the end of F.E.A.R 1 is happening, and going through the opening level with the knowledge of what's about to happen is eerie, and the game knows it. The backing track of this area is nothing but an echoing whine, and as someone who's just played F.E.A.R 1, the feeling I get from the ambience is amazing. In F.E.A.R 1, you walked through every back alley and sideway in Fairport. You never saw any civilians or anything. One of the things that contributed to the first game's lonely atmosphere was knowing that all this weird shit was happening to you while life was still normal for everyone else. So looking out the window and seeing hundreds of cars zooming down highways all over the city, seeing people going about their lives just like it was implied they were doing in the first game, is refreshing yet strangely haunting. For the first time in the F.E.A.R series, you don't feel utterly alone. The sun is coming up, people are going to work, but we as the audience know that this is a piece that won't last. I think that's why the ambient track adds so much to the scene. It doesn't sound chirpy or happy, it sounds decaying and old. The game isn't showing us Fairport at sunrise to signify the end of a nightmare, it's signifying the beginning of one. It's just no one knows it yet. After fighting through some squads, we begin having some run-ins with Alma. The first time we actually see her is when we enter this pool room, and no joke, this is one of the best scares in the series. Yeah, the devs literally scripted Alma to follow the player until they turn around. Like, there was something just so cool about that to me. Further through the level, we see Alma again in the penthouse where she's looking at a music box. Interacting with it, we see a flashback of Alma's childhood, and back in the present, we find that the music box was a switch to open a secret door. Inside, there's a pinboard that shows that Genevieve has been keeping tabs on the Origin facility in Auburn for a while now, and once we locate Genevieve, she actually isn't surprised to see us at all. This is pretty much confirmed as she tells us that Beckett and his team are the only ones that can stop Alma. On the monitors, we can see Aristide's been monitoring the Origin facility, and just as Harlan releases the vengeful spirit, everything stops for us.
Sergeant Beckett, what's wrong?
What is it?
Seeing the visage of Alma, we follow her, and making it to the balcony, one of the best moments in the series happens. The Origin facility has just exploded thanks to Point Man's efforts to contain Alma, and from this point in the series, everything changes. For the worst, granted, but we're going to talk about that later. Fading in and out of consciousness, we see the aftermath of the explosion, and just before blacking out for the final time, we see some men and Aristide step into view. In the next cutscene, we see Beckett is being operated on with Genevieve overseeing the procedure, but it doesn't seem like they're saving Beckett's life, more like they're doing something to it. Waking up in a hospital room, we receive a radio transmission from a few members of our squad, and our objective is to link up with them. So leaving the room, we go exploring, and the atmosphere is immense. No one is around. We're constantly seeing the visage of Alma out the corner of our eye, and on the TV we get vague reports of the Auburn explosion.
The explosion is still unknown. CFNDC is just now getting us information on the story. We're calling in all our sources to try to figure out what's going on.
Pretty much right off the bat, this game has way better level design than the first. In the OG F.E.A.R, the levels were super open to allow the AI to move around, but it made the environments feel messy and really confusing to traverse. Mostly in this opening part of the game, a pretty good balance is struck between having the areas be explorable while not being confusing, and if you play the games back to back, it's really refreshing. Like, looking around actually benefits the players, since you can find lore tidbits, items, or even just experience a creepy scripted event. Despite not looking as great as the first F.E.A.R, the world this one inhabits feels more lived in, which I think is great. I will take substance over style any day, and F.E.A.R 2, while it doesn't do a lot of things better than F.E.A.R 1, the things it does do better, it does them really, really well. Making our way out of the hospital, we suddenly witness the execution of a nurse, and the soldier that killed her starts coming after us. Running away, we bump into Genevieve, who tells us that we need to get to something called the TAC lab, and that the men hunting us down are here to cover up evidence for armor cam. Continuing on, we eventually get our hands on a gun and enter our first real fight of the game. And why is it the first real fight, I hear you ask? Well, it's because the operation we underwent gave us none other than Point Man powers. Wait, you think I'm gonna talk about gameplay now? They didn't add anything. Okay, so that's a little bit of a lie. The gameplay of F.E.A.R 2 is the same as F.E.A.R 1, but also not. To break this down, let's just get something out of the way. In my opinion, F.E.A.R 1's combat systems were bloated, and I'm not talking about the overall combat here, I'm talking about the sheer number of options the player had when it came to fighting. You could lean around walls, there were like 7 different types of grenades, and some of those grenades pretty much did the same job the others did. Now, I praised F.E.A.R's play your own way approach to combat in my retrospective for it, and I'm only singing a different tune here because F.E.A.R 2 is a refined version of that system, and all that refining does is show just how shallow the gameplay was on the player's side of the fence the whole time. In this game, corner leaning is out the window. Grenade types have been rolled into each other to make kind of hybrid, more useful versions of them. You can cook grenades, but that's about it for the new gameplay stuff in this entry. Essentially, all they've done is removed features while developing the ones they've kept to be more up to date with the likes of Call of Duty at the time. So the gameplay does not really change much to differentiate itself as a sequel. And I feel like that's almost a missed opportunity, because just giving Beckett Point Man's powers here narratively hurts the story for me. And that's mostly because these guys are so similar. They control the same, they don't talk, and the only real difference is that people refer to you as Beckett and not Buddy. It also doesn't help that the enemies in the game just aren't the same as the previous one. We'll talk specifics later, but the enemy AI is just as smart as F.E.A.R 1, but the level design hinders their deployment. F.E.A.R 1 had confusing but open levels that allowed enemies to plan expansive strategies, which just isn't something they have here. Like, how many options does an enemy really have when their arena is a hallway with a couple of rooms with no flanking routes? The AI losing an important edge, as well as the gameplay being, if anything, stripped down, leaves the entire experience feeling like it's devolved. We're playing F.E.A.R 0.5. It's just weird, because while I talked highly of the gameplay in F.E.A.R 1, I didn't exactly find it fun, and it's the same here, except now I can't feel the options I have at my fingertips. The depth of the gameplay isn't there. But yeah, that's my little rant about the gameplay over, and I had to talk about it now because nothing really happens in this opening level. I mean, a lot actually happens, but all of it feels really non-eventful, because this feels like the intro, and yet this section goes on for nearly 2 hours. So instead of torturing myself and pretending to find this part of the game interesting, I will give you a rundown of hospital stuff that happens that would be interesting in any other setting, but isn't interesting here. Pretty much, our radio is hacked by a guy calling himself Snakefist, and he seems to be on our side, telling us to get to Wade Elementary School if we want to stop Alma. We meet up with Genevieve and enter the TAC machine, but the procedure doesn't go to plan, and we're ambushed by the leader of the Armacare mercenaries called Colonel Vanek.
Good morning, chickpea.
Yep, he's the Norton Mapes of this game, if you can't tell. We escape Vanek, he tries to kill us, we escape Vanek, we meet some of these freaky guys called Abominations, we find out this place is not a hospital, but instead an underground Armacam facility. One of our squad mates gets hypnotized by Alma and swiftly discombobulated. And we finally exit the facility. In my videos, I like to keep a certain amount of flow, so there's a part of me right now that feels like I've done a disservice to you guys by summing up 2 hours of the game in 30 seconds, but then again, this opening part kinda sucks. And I know I was praising the atmosphere just a second ago, but this game has the same problem F.E.A.R 1 does with the level design. There's just too much of one place for too long. So while the whole facade of being in a hospital is great for the first 20 minutes, it quickly starts to lose its charm when you realize you're not actually in a hospital, because the next question is, where am I? But you don't get any of those answers until you spend another hour or so trudging through the not hospital. This isn't going to be an exclusive first level thing either, by the way. If you go into a building during the campaign, you better be prepared to spend a hot minute in there, because while this game does do level design better, it doesn't mean there's any less level than there was in the last game. Anyway, making it to the surface, we find ourselves in a warehouse, and with our objective still set to link up with our squad, we begin trying to leave. Heading out into the street, we can see the full extent of the damage caused by the Origin explosion. Buildings are in ruin. The streets are a mess. There are ash sculptures all through the street of what used to be people, immortalized in their panic at the moment of the explosion. In a flash, the story of F.E.A.R has turned from a couple of gunfights in dark, abandoned alleys to a full-on apocalypse. And personally, I love it. The city streets in F.E.A.R 2 take on an atmosphere wholly different from the original. While F.E.A.R 1 was about cold dread and loneliness, F.E.A.R 2 has a sense of despair while also projecting a completely different sense of loneliness. The ambience is just impeccable. Heading to link up with our team, Alma reawakens the replica soldiers that went dormant after Paxton was killed. And if you think replicas are the only enemies that are introduced here, you are wrong. There are so many enemies introduced during this street sequence that I think it might be time for... So like in F.E.A.R 1, there are kind of two types of enemies in the game. Humans, except each type has something slightly different about their gameplay, and unique enemies, which do stuff like not shoot you with a gun. Humans, you get the general idea about them. Flamethrower guy has a flamethrower, sniper guy has a sniper, and when he's aiming there's a laser pointer that you can see. Heavy armored guy has a lot of health. You get the idea, and they are boring. I don't want to talk about them today. What I really want to talk about is the unique enemies, because F.E.A.R 2 introduces quite a few of them, and they are way more interesting than the first game. So the first things first is that the game introduces the Rev 6's older brother, called the EPA, or Elite Powered Armor. It's bigger, it's tougher, and it fires explosive shells and rockets, but ironically it's easier to fight than the Rev 6, since you can just go rat mode if one of these things shows up and hide in a little crevice while grenade spamming the thing. The Abomination is a new addition to the ranks, which you run into in the hospital level. In the lore, these guys are failed experiments who were meant to become psychic commanders like Paxton, but were driven insane by the procedure. And while these guys are scary, they're kind of like the assassin from F.E.A.R 1, where they just run up to you and try to thwack you. So the solution to this problem is simply activating slow motion and shooting them. Although this isn't much of a complaint, because Abominations mostly attack in groups. The Spectre is the leftover psychic signature of civilians caught in the Origin explosion, and all they really do is hang around until the player gets too close, at which point they'll attack by running at the player and exploding. Shooting these guys even once will shut them down, but they're kind of like the Abomination, where they mostly show up in packs. Finally, we have my absolute favorite new enemy, which is the Remnant. These are people who didn't die to the Origin explosion, but were mutated by Alma's psychic influence afterwards, and because of this, they've become almost zombie-like. Every time you run into a Remnant, they're imitating what they would be doing in their everyday life before the explosion. Once triggered, a Remnant will run around the map reviving corpses that will attempt to kill you, and while this is cool, the major strategy for beating these guys is to ignore the revived enemies and just hard focus the Remnant itself. This is because most of the time, once it's activated, it will just hide in a corner letting its little minions do the work, but if you find it, you can just unload all your bullets into it, and its only defense is pretty much screaming at you. Oh yeah, and you know how I complained in the F.E.A.R 1 retrospective about how some of the coolest enemies in the game were also some of the least encountered? Well, they didn't learn their lesson here, because Remnants, the saddest, the scariest, and downright most intriguing enemies in the game, hell, in the series, show up a grand total of 3 times. 3 times in the entire game. Why did you make the enemy? It just baffles me that they wasted such a good enemy. I don't understand. But yeah, those are the new additions to the enemy roster, and I don't really have an issue with any of them. I always felt that in F.E.A.R 1 there weren't enough paranormal enemies for such a paranormally focused game, which F.E.A.R 2 fixes to some degree. Many of the enemies from the last game, like replica heavies or assassins or Rev 6s, are here too, but they're given a bit more of a backseat when talking about special enemies, since this game kind of moves away from the idea that a special enemy is just a guy with a lot of health. Anyway, so getting back on the story, we make our way through the city for a bit, fighting replicas until...
Repairs complete.
Holy shit, I'm gonna come.
Yep, F.E.A.R 2 has mech combat, and sadly there isn't a whole lot to say about it. There's 2 mech sequences in the game, and most of what it boils down to is stomp around, shoot, fire rockets, and pretend you're playing Titanfall 3.
Violent.
Occasionally an enemy mech will show up to fight you, but there's not much nuance here. It just comes down to who can output more damage quicker. Really, I felt a little mixed on this element when I first played, because I felt the gameplay addition was moving away from what I thought F.E.A.R was meant to be about, which was scurrying around alleyways desperately trying to survive against all odds. But these days I've kind of come around on it. F.E.A.R 2 is an action horror game with an emphasis on action coming first, but that doesn't mean it leaves horror twisting in the wind. When horror sequences come up, you're essentially helpless. When action sequences come up, you're challenged, and when mech or turret sequences come up, you're given free rein to let loose a little. So overall, it balances itself out. But no matter what I say, at the end of the day, I'm just overanalyzing what is just a wicked mech scene. So after shooting our way through the city, we finally start getting close to our squad mates, but over the radio we hear our team leader start talking about seeing a crying woman, and making our way to our location, we see he's had the misfortune of running into Alma. Heading inside to assist, we make it just a bit too late.
I saw her at the end of the hall.
Griffin! Tom!
Stay back! Stay the fuck back! Oh, fuck me!
Griffin!
Damn. You wanna know a fun fact? Kira Stokes, the comms operator on our squad, was voiced by Jen Taylor, who has probably shown up in a lot of games you've played. She played Cortana in Halo, Toad in Luigi's Mansion, and Zoe in Left 4 Dead. But the reason I'm telling you this is because the voice actor slash mocap actor and face actor for Alma in this game, Alicia Glidewell, was the original face for Zoe in the early days of Left 4 Dead. And get this, she's also the model that Valve used to build Chell's appearance in the Portal series. So yeah, small world. There are a lot of voice actors in F.E.A.R 2 that were active in the early 2000s that you might recognize, and Jen Taylor is just one of them. I mean, even the guy that voices Keegan just happens to have voiced male citizens from Half-Life 2, and none other than the fucking sniper from TF2. Like, holy shit, John Patrick Lowry jumpscare.
Lieutenant.
Sometimes I dream about cheese.
Anyway, after witnessing the horrible demise of our boss, we meet up with the rest of our squad and head to Wade Elementary to meet up with the guy who's been contacting us on the radio. And I know I haven't really talked about the guy on the radio, so I'll give you a brief rundown. Pretty much, he calls himself Snakefist, and as far as we know, he works for but is not fond of Genevieve Aristide. Over the past few levels, he's been intermittently raiding us, giving us info, and what we've learned from him is that Aristide hasn't been completely honest with us. Back in the hospital when we entered the TAC machine, Aristide was increasing our psychic signature to the point that Alma would take notice and start coming after Beckett to, quote, absorb him. This is part of Aristide's plan to get the Armacam board of directors back on her side. By somehow using Beckett to capture Alma, she won't be seen as a scapegoat anymore, probably even guaranteeing her a higher place in the company. But Snakefist tells us in chunks that Genevieve's plan to capture Alma won't work, and he has an alternate one that we need to come see him to act out. So yeah, that's why we're going to Wade Elementary School. And if you think all that info seems a little bit big to be known at this point in the story, I completely agree. But that's just how the game is. It's short, and by this point, halfway through, only past the second area, you pretty much know everything. There's nothing really that's gonna blindside you. Well, not much. Aristide is in classic evil corporation fashion, backstabbing us for her own gain, and we don't want that to happen. That's pretty much it. From this part in the story, nothing majorly shifts the cards. The plot doesn't take an overly surprising twist. Our objective never changes. Everything we do in F.E.A.R 2 is to get Alma off our tail. That's it. And I've got a lot to say about how this hurts the overall experience, but we're gonna have to save that for later because we still do have a little bit more of this game to go through. Arriving at Wade Elementary, there's a strange kind of peace in the air. The destruction and battle raging within the city is now behind us, and for the first time, we can see the sun. The low whistling of the wind mixed with the distant explosions almost gives off the feeling that you haven't escaped, but instead you're running, and it's all coming after you. Heading inside the school, the atmosphere shifts a little bit. The peace and dread of the outside world is now gone, replaced with a foreboding silence. On some TVs, we can see that this school is completely controlled by Armacam, and our objective is set to get to the nurse's office to meet Snakefist.
Just down the hallway. Many problems are easily resolved by taking a small trip to your friendly nurse station. Oh, there's the doctor now.
Walking through the school with Kira, we go through a door and suddenly get pulled into a hallucination of Alma swinging on a tree. Coming to, the door we've just gone through is gone, and we've been separated from Stokes. Now going forward in the level, a ton of stuff happens. Replica forces begin showing up because they're drawn to our psychic signature, Armacam also begins arriving, and a huge fight ensues across the school. But let me put it out there that all of this stuff is irrelevant because of all the things that happens in Wade Elementary. The fighting is not the interesting part. If you ask anyone that's played F.E.A.R 2 what their favorite part is, a lot of them will say it's Wade Elementary, because this is one of the best put together sequences of horror in the entire series.
whole nother level.
And it all starts in this hallway. By the way, if you don't do well with flashing lights, I would suggest you skip this bit. This hallway is a masterclass of scripting. At a certain point, your light stops working properly. Spectres begin appearing from all sides, not allowing you time to focus on any one element. In the flashes of vision you get from the ceiling lights, we get bits of what's happening around us. Bodies stuck to the ceiling, Alma reaching out for us, a body dragged away, Alma again. So much is happening, so many things are coming for you. This is fight or flight and you don't know the enemy, so you need to run. Breaking through a door, Alma appears to us again, attacking us. Strangely, she seems almost hurt as we throw her off, and pinning us to the ceiling, Alma reveals her true intentions. She doesn't want to absorb Beckett, as Snakefist says. She wants Beckett. Now, until this point in the game, we didn't know what Alma was after. According to Snakefist, she wants to absorb Beckett's psychic signature. But if she really wanted to do that, she could have done it earlier, but instead she's just kind of stalked us and defended us even at some points. This has kind of created a mystery of why she's coming after us, and the truth is, Alma wants her kids back. That is Alma's whole objective during this game. If you think about it this way, at the moment, Alma believes both her children are dead. Paxton was shot and left in the Origin facility, and Point Man was not present in the wreckage of the helicopter Alma downed at the end of the first game. In the hospital level of this game, you can even see Alma searching the morgue for Point Man's body. During the same level, we can hear Alma say, "I want them back." And our squad mate that got discombobulated said that he thinks Alma is crying because Armacam took her babies away. From Alma's point of view, the only people in life that she didn't see as evil or trying to hurt her were her children, but the events of the first F.E.A.R game once again took them away from her. So naturally, once she became aware of Beckett, she began flirting with him. And if deprived of social contact your whole life, I'm pretty sure that you would consider flirting to be literally attacking the other person as well.
I'm good. I'm good.
So continuing through the school, we're continuously stalked by Alma, and every time we're not fighting, we're running through haunted house sections, but eventually we make it to the nurse's office, which turns out to be less an office and more an elevator to an underground facility, and this is the headquarters of Armacam's Project Harbinger. Essentially, Project Harbinger is an attempt to create psychic commanders like Paxton Fettel without having to breed them from existing psychics. The way this is done is by setting up literally an entire school and experimenting on the students. These students from the get-go are gifted according to some in-game documents, and they are separated into 3 categories: bluebirds, ladybugs, and tree frogs. Bluebirds are the most simple group to be in. The students are given placebo supplements and told it will make them smarter or something like that, and they are observed over their time at the school to see if psychic abilities will develop by themselves. Note, they didn't. Ladybugs are given a mutagen called PN5A, which is the most effective in developing psychic abilities, however they are hard to control. And finally, tree frogs are given a mutagen called PN5B, which supports the development of psychic abilities with more stability, but doesn't develop psychic powers so noticeably. And that's pretty much the whole project. Armacam desperately wants to find a way to get another Paxton Fettel in a more controlled environment, and it turns out they've been pursuing this for quite some time. Because get this, all of the members of Beckett's squad except Stokes underwent this program at this school when they were kids. They just have no memory of it. That's why Genevieve Aristide wanted Dark Signal specifically to come get her, because while they may not have developed the ability to control replicas, they would make great bait for Alma Wade, who could sense their psychic signatures. So that is the long and short of what the school and the facility is about. And honestly, I don't know if I've just been desensitized to Armacam plots at this point, but half Harbinger doesn't feel like the massive deal it's made out to be in the game. We know Armacam is bad news. We know they have no problem experimenting on kids. So discovering everything about Harbinger doesn't change anything in the story. It just adds context to what's already happened, making it kind of feel like,
so what's the big fucking deal?
But anyway, we aren't actually at Wade Elementary for Harbinger, we're here for Snake Fist. So continuing through the facility, we run into Colonel Vanek and have the most epic boss fight in any F.E.A.R game ever with him.
Is now accessible.
Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering why I didn't really touch on Colonel Vanek, it's because he's not really important. Every couple of levels, he just shows up and he's like, I want Beckett killed, and that's it. He's just here to say funny drill instructor things. Anyway, after vacating the vicinity of Vanek, we finally make it to Snake Fist's hideout.
You made it! Man, I thought I was toast! I'm Terry Halford, aka Snake Fist.
Terry doesn't really tell us that much when we meet him. All we really get is that we need to go to Still Island, an Armacam facility the company used to imprison Alma before the Origin facility was in use. And other than that, he gives us an energy weapon and...
Now, let's get the hell out of here!
You know, I don't ever think I've played a game where a character is built up as much as Snake Fist is, only for that character to just be killed instantly. This game's writing is so strange. But if we do get anything from this little trip, it's a cool energy launcher, which is unbelievably OP. When you shoot this thing, it fires out a glowing blue orb that turns anyone near it into a skeleton. And if the enemy doesn't have a skeleton, it will do a ton of damage to them. And if that's not enough, the ball then explodes. This thing is literally just the BFG from Doom. If you want a room cleared, just fire one of these off. So shooting our way out of the school and linking back up with our squad, we go and look through Terry's data where he explains his plan. Both Genevieve and Snake Fist want Beckett to go to Steel Island and sit in a machine called the Telesthetic Amplifier. But while Genevieve wants to trap Alma inside while using Beckett as bait, Snake Fist wants to turn on the amplifier. This would crank up Beckett's psychic ability to the point where he could beat Alma in a battle of wills. So with our objective set, we begin heading to Still Island, but the transport is ambushed by replicas on the way, and during the defense sequence, Keegan is seemingly hypnotized by Alma and runs away. Being tasked with bringing him back, we're sent after him, and everybody, I would love to welcome you to the part of the video where my already loose story breakdown breaks down fully, because this is where my problems with this game become unignorable. They become so unbelievably blatant, I just have to whine about them for the rest of the video. My major number one problem with this game is that it is 6 hours long. It is a short game in all regards, and yet it is boring as fuck. Every area in the 6 hours is stretched to its absolute limit of how little story can happen in the longest amount of time. Granted, a lot of the F.E.A.R series is guilty of doing this. They say, here's an objective, go do it. But they never tell you that this objective may or may not take you 2 hours. There's a point you reach during your objectives where you begin to wonder if you're done with a section every single time. And there's no better example of this than when we're sent after Keegan. The stage is set here for the final showdown. We know where we need to go. Many of the supporting characters are dead, but for some reason the game decides we need an hour of chasing Keegan. Just while we're on this objective alone, we have to fight our way through the subway, through the streets in a mech, through an Armacam facility, on an Armacam train, through an Armacam train station, and eventually we just give up on trying to find Keegan and end up going to Still Island. This fucking sucks because there are so many cool set pieces and things you can find mind while you're going after Keegan. Like in the subways, we get a laser gun. In the streets, we get to see the crater that the Origin facility explosion caused. Or there's a moment where Alma constantly attacks you from multiple angles. It's all great stuff, but the overarching story does not support the little things like this. You don't feel like you're getting in 90% of your fights for any particular reason other than the fact that the game needs to give you something to do. It just feels like the game isn't trying to engage the player. It's not trying to offer you an experience. It's not trying to take you on a ride. It's trying to stop you from completing it too soon. It's like, here's an objective. Here's where you are. Here's 7 different fights, player. It's almost like the game is obligated to exist. So they're like, okay, here's a baseline story, and then just make them fight like a million people on the way there while we just drag our heels. But I digress. We're going to leave this rant for the end of the video, because if you can believe it or not, the final 20 minutes only adds more fuel to my fire. Anyway, reaching Still Island, we can find Alma's tree. This is the tree that we have seen in every hallucination with Alma, and every time it's been seen, it's been on a grassy hill in the open. But here we find that this is where Alma was allowed to be outside during her captivity. Also, I know it is jarring for me to go from complaining to praising this game, but this exact area, this moment in the game, is one of the only parts that actually makes me feel something. This tree represented freedom to Alma. That's why we've always seen it on a hill. Her most free, her most fond memories come from a tree swing that looks like it's a part of a zoo enclosure. To me, this drives home the tragedy of Alma's story. A girl with extraordinary powers is betrayed by her father and robbed of her childhood and life in every way. And out of all of it, this is the place she is most fond of. A dead tree in a muddy enclosure. Sometimes F.E.A.R 2 channels the emotions that the original game radiated. In F.E.A.R 1, every bit of the mystery you uncovered was not pleasant. Every scrap you pieced together added to the ambience, the cold sadness that saturated the game. Sometimes F.E.A.R 2 remembers what it is, where it came from, the story. It remembers how to do that ambience well, but there's something missing. Making our way through the facility, we eventually meet up with Stokes, and entering the amplifier chamber, we go about setting up the solution to all our problems. Once that's done, Kira straps us into the chair when we're suddenly ambushed by an old face.
Aristide? What's wrong with you? We have to stop Alma!
That's exactly what I intend to do.
But Beckett's not strong enough without the amplifier. She'll absorb him.
And then we'll lock them away.
What the fuck is wrong with you? Why are you doing this?
Without Alma, I don't have any leverage. Without leverage, I don't have a future.
I can't believe this. The city's a smoldering ruin, and you're worried about your fucking resume.
Listen!
No, you listen. We're doing this Halford's way. We're gonna kill this bitch.
Oh man, the writing in this game is so good. Holy shit. By the way, guys, who would win? A corporate executive with a gun or a special forces soldier with a gun?
I'm sorry it came to this.
I think I know about 10 people in real life who aren't special forces soldiers who would probably have handled that a little bit better than Stokes just did. Like, what the fuck? Genevieve already turned off the amplifier and had the gun out, so why would you even try to negotiate with her? And if you're in the mindset of not negotiating, why are you letting her keep the gun? Genevieve barely had time to raise the gun at Stokes when she loudly announced that she was going to kill Aristide, and Stokes' back was turned. That means that Stokes could have 100% either shot or disarmed Genevieve at least here, here, and here. At least. Keyword, at least. You wouldn't even have to do anything fancy. She is limping. Like, just push her off the platform. I don't know how anyone wrote this scene or looked at it or acted it out and was like, yeah, that's not contrived at all. Anyway, because the plot demands it, Genevieve seals Beckett in the vault with Alma, and she begins to assault Beckett while also forcing his mind into a hallucination. During this scene, we have to reactivate the amplifier, which I don't really know what that would do if we're in a hallucination, but whatever. And each time we throw a switch, Keegan shows up with a bunch of clones to try kill us, since he's become fully converted by Alma. But yeah, really, there's not much to this fight. You just run around the map, kill Keegans and throw the switches, and yeah, that's it. So yeah, that is F.E.A.R 2, and there's not much to say about this game other than it is confused. To put it in the most simple terms, F.E.A.R 2 wants to be F.E.A.R 2, but it doesn't know what made F.E.A.R 1 F.E.A.R 1. It improves on the design of the original in quite a few categories. Level design is back on the menu, with locations actually being places rather than them being a general concept of the area the player is in. There's a lot of good scares in the game, and oops, I've run out of good things to say about F.E.A.R 2, because if there is one thing F.E.A.R 2 is, it is the worst thing you can be if you're an artistic piece of media, and that is mediocre. The story is quite literally one note. Alma starts stalking you, and your job is to get her to stop. That's what you try to do at the end of the game, but you fail, and the game ends on a cliffhanger. But a cliffhanger for what? Harlan warns that if Alma gets out, it will be catastrophic in the first game, and yet everything that happens in F.E.A.R 2 is pretty much everyone else's fault. Point Man made the Origin facility detonate. Aristide was the one that made you bait for Alma. The replicas are only coming after you because of the insane psychic reading you're giving off. Alma isn't really doing anything here, and now it's the end of the game, she's pregnant, and you want me to care? Why? Despite what it looks like, there is no payoff from F.E.A.R 1 in F.E.A.R 2. Alma's story does not progress until the end, and considering that she is one of the only continuing story elements brought over from F.E.A.R 1 means that the entire story as a whole does not progress. That is something you cannot have if you are a sequel. I have a little example I like to use when thinking about this game. It is like you're craving a burger, right? You've been craving one all week and you finally have one. This burger you're eating is the tastiest, most delicious burger, most fulfilling thing in the world. You're eating this thing and you're like, yeah, this is what I wanted. But then you finish eating it and you've realized it has not satisfied your hunger at all. That is what F.E.A.R 2 is. You feel like you're getting more fear while you're playing F.E.A.R 2, but once you're done, you realize you can't pull out a single discernible thing that made it a good F.E.A.R game. To be completely blunt, this whole experience feels like filler. It feels like a side story while the main campaign is going on somewhere else, and based on how F.E.A.R 2 is referenced and treated in F.E.A.R 3, it's not far off the truth. Even the main campaign feels like it's made of filler, like they didn't have enough story to go around, so they had to stretch each area out as far as they could manage. The entire experience just mostly ends up feeling like there's not a whole lot going on here. In fact, you guys are gonna love this. One of the biggest overarching story drivers in F.E.A.R 2 is not even a part of the main campaign. It's a DLC called F.E.A.R 2 Reborn.
This is Foxtrot 813, preparing for touchdown.
In Reborn, you play as a replica soldier named Foxtrot 813, who is possessed by the spirit of Paxton Fettel and guided towards reviving him. But there's a problem here. I can't really talk about this DLC because it's got the same problems as the main game. It is full of filler. All that happens during this DLC is that you get possessed and now you have to fight your way to the Origin crater to revive Paxton. There's nothing new to talk about with the DLC except for Alma apparently not wanting Paxton to be reborn. Through the campaign, she tries to kill 813 multiple times, and even Paxton shit talks Alma a little bit during the levels.
They do not understand. They are blind to whom they serve.
but none of this feels legit. Paxton is constantly yapping on about, finally, it's time to be reborn. Dude, you've been dead technically half a day. Like, doesn't anybody else see this? The DLC comes to an end with Paxton transferring his consciousness into Foxtrot 813, and you would be forgiven for believing that this sets up the next chapter of Paxton's story in the series as a whole.
I am reborn.
But I hate to inform you that F.E.A.R 3 completely ignores this DLC. Paxton is revived in F.E.A.R 3, but it is not explained, and the actual piece of media that shows him being revived is ignored. What is wrong with this series, guys? Finally, for this retrospective, there is multiplayer, and this section will be short. Pretty much, this is your average early 2000s multiplayer mode. There's deathmatch, capture the flag, that's about it. It does improve some things over the original F.E.A.R, like these maps are actually now interesting to look at, and there's also a new game mode where you get to play mech vs mech. So yeah, no complaints about the multiplayer, pretty good, although Monolith, please nerf the energy rifle.
Holy shit.
Bringing this all to a close, I will say that F.E.A.R 2 is my biggest contender for Forgettable Game of the Year award every year. F.E.A.R 3 might be bad, but at least I remember it for the reasons I don't like it. F.E.A.R 1 might not be perfect, but at least I remember it for the way it makes me feel. But F.E.A.R 2 makes me feel nothing. It's forgettable. It's strangely safe feeling considering the things it does in the campaign. It just doesn't fill the combat boots of the previous game. To make a comparison, this is what it would feel like to play Half-Life 2 if Half-Life 2 was Blue Shift. Like, it's a major entry in the series, and yet somehow it feels like a sidestep into a smaller scale story. Overall, there's just not much to say. F.E.A.R 2 is just mediocre. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just in the sweet spot of being okay. And don't get me wrong, games are allowed to be okay, but the problem with this one is that it just happened to be an okay sequel to one of the best shooters of the early 2000s. And that's why I'm giving this game and its DLC the rating it deserves. A middle of the road, just okay, downright average, 5 out of 10.